The judge at the Yorkshire Blues competition looked at entry number 7 on the sign-up sheet. Jack Turner, age 57, retired plumber, Leeds, and said with the confident authority of someone who had been evaluating guitarists at this competition for 28 years. "Solid basics, Jack. Timing's all right. Phrasing's a bit predictable. You scraped through." The 300 people in the boardwalk on a Saturday night in Sheffield clapped politely. Jack Turner, reading glasses, plain dark jacket, no hat, no rings, nodded, thanked the judge, and walked to the back of the room where Ronnie Wood was sitting with both hands pressed over his face to prevent the sound from coming out. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe if you haven't already. Jack Turner's real name was Keith Richards. Ronnie Wood had arranged the whole thing, and the best part of the evening was still 2 rounds away. The idea had come from Ronnie Wood on a Thursday in November 2003, delivered by telephone with the mischievous enthusiasm of a man who had been planning this longer than he was admitting. The Stones were not on tour. The album was done. There was time. "Listen," Ronnie had said. "There's a blues competition at the boardwalk in Sheffield on Saturday, amateur night. Local judges who've been doing it for 30 years. 3 rounds, proper format. I sign you up under a fake name. You dress down, no rings, reading glasses, plain jacket. Nobody recognizes you. You see how far you get before someone figures it out." There was a pause on the phone. "And what are you doing?" Keith Richards had said, "while I'm being told I need more practice." Ronnie had said, "I'll be at the back trying not to make any noise." Another pause. "What's the name?" Keith Richards had said. "Jack Turner," Ronnie had said, "retired plumber, Leeds, age 57. Keith Richards had been quiet for 3 seconds. "I'm in," Keith Richards had said. The prospect of standing on a stage in front of people who had no idea who he was, of being evaluated on the playing alone without the weight of 50 years of reputation pressing down on every note, appealed to something in Keith Richards that had missed the feeling of being just another person with a guitar trying to earn the room's attention through the music itself. The boardwalk had been a Sheffield music institution since 1987, occupying a basement on Snig Hill that held approximately 300 people at capacity, the specific intimate capacity of a room where the audience can hear the performer breathe. On the first Saturday of every November, it hosted the Yorkshire Blues competition, which had been running since 1975 and drew amateur guitarists from across South Yorkshire with the promise of 3 rounds, a modest trophy, and the satisfaction of earning something in front of a room that understood what it was watching. The judge, who had been running the competition since 1975, was a man named Dave Mellor. Dave Mellor was 58, had been running the only music shop in Sheffield city centre since 1981, and had been the competition's head judge since 1975. Dave was a knowledgeable musician with a genuine love for the blues and a commitment to Sheffield's music community. Dave also had the particular professional confidence that develops in a person who has occupied a position of authority for 28 years without ever encountering someone who knew considerably more about the subject than he did. Dave had no way of knowing that this was the last Saturday evening on which that distinction would apply. Keith Richards arrived at the boardwalk at 8:15, having taken the train from London with Ronnie Wood, who'd been vibrating with suppressed amusement for the entire journey and who had made Keith Richards promise 3 times that Keith Richards would play genuinely mediocre in the first round and not give it away. Keith Richards had promised, and Keith Richards kept promises when the promise was worth keeping. Keith Richards was wearing a plain dark jacket over a dark shirt, dark trousers, dark boots from which the silver toe caps had been removed, reading glasses from Ronnie's jacket pocket, and no hat. Ronnie had signed Keith Richards up on the competition sheet that afternoon as Jack Turner, age 57, retired plumber from Leeds, and had listed the contact number for a prepaid mobile phone he had bought at a service station on the way. Keith Richards had looked at the entry and said, "You put 57. Ronnie had said, "I shaved 2 years off. You look young for your age. No one will question it." The 12 contestants for the evening included a 20-year-old university student, a 45-year-old postman, 3 people who appeared to have come specifically to support each other, and a 19-year-old girl named Emma Hartley, who was, Keith Richards could see from 2 rows back, the most gifted person in the room. The first round began at 9 o'clock. 12 contestants, 1 song each. The performances ranged from genuinely accomplished to bravely enthusiastic, and the boardwalk crowd responded to each one with the generous warmth of an audience that understood what it cost a person to get up there. Keith Richards was called seventh. Keith Richards walked to the stage with the slightly hesitant gait of a man who was not accustomed to performing in this kind of setting, which required considerably more acting effort than it might have appeared given that Keith Richards had been walking onto stages with absolute confidence since 1963. Keith Richards sat on the stool, settled the borrowed Telecaster across his knee, and played. Keith Richards played a 12-bar blues in a major that was technically correct, rhythmically steady, and deliberately, scrupulously, almost scientifically unremarkable. The musical equivalent of a professional rally driver navigating a car park at 15 miles per hour without touching any of the lines. When Keith Richards finished, Dave leaned into his microphone. "Solid basics, Jack. Timing's all right. Phrasing's a bit predictable, and I'd work on your dynamics. You scraped through." 300 people clapped politely. Keith Richards nodded, thanked the judges, and walked to the back of the room. Ronnie Wood, at the back table, had both hands pressed flat over his mouth. Keith Richards sat down beside Ronnie. Ronnie's shoulders were moving. "Phrasing's a bit predictable," Ronnie said, his voice approximately 1/16 of its normal volume. 47 years and your phrasing is predictable." The two of them spent the next 5 minutes in the specific condition of people who are laughing very hard and cannot make any sound, periodically wiping their eyes and pretending to consult the evening's program. The semifinal featured 6 contestants. The field was stronger now, the less confident players having been eliminated, and the guitarists who remained played with the focused energy of people who knew they were one round from the final. Keith Richards played a slightly more adventurous blues piece this second time, adding melodic embellishments that hinted at a deeper vocabulary without fully revealing it, the equivalent of a chess grandmaster allowing 1 or 2 interesting moves to surface while keeping the actual game safely concealed. Dave's semi-final assessment was marginally more encouraging. "Better, Jack. I can see the progression from the first round. You've got something in there, a feel for the instrument that the technique hasn't quite caught up with yet. With proper tuition from a qualified instructor, you could really develop what you've got." Ronnie Wood, at the point where Dave said, "proper tuition from a qualified instructor," stood up from his chair, excused himself to the people at the surrounding tables, walked to the bar, walked through the bar, found the door to the staircase, climbed the stairs, stood on Snig Hill in the November night air, and spent 4 minutes leaning against the building making sounds into his jacket collar that the pedestrians passing on the street apparently found concerning. The final round, 3 contestants remained. Emma Hartley, 19 years old, who had been competing in the Yorkshire Blues competition for 3 consecutive years and who had twice reached the final and twice placed second. Keith Richards had understood within 30 seconds of Emma's first performance that Emma Hartley was not an amateur in any meaningful sense of the word. Emma played with the specific quality that only arrived when a musician had stopped thinking about what they were doing and had allowed the music to make its own decisions. The second finalist was Liam Bradley, 38, a local blues player with solid technique and a loyal following in the Sheffield bar circuit. The third was Jack Turner, the retired plumber from Leeds, who apparently needed proper tuition. Emma played first. Emma played a fingerstyle arrangement of a blues standard that she had reworked so completely that it had become something else, something that was hers, recognizably descended from the source material but transformed by the specific emotional intelligence that 18 months of daily practice had built into her hands. When Emma finished, 300 people were on their feet. Dave beamed. Liam played second and delivered the kind of confident, crowd-pleasing blues set that the boardwalk crowd knew how to receive, and received warmly. Then Dave called the final name, Jack Turner. Keith Richards walked to the stage for one last time on that particular evening. Keith Richards sat on the stool. Keith Richards placed the borrowed Telecaster across his knee. Keith Richards looked out at 300 people in the oldest music room in Sheffield and then did what he had been waiting all evening to do. Keith Richards took off the reading glasses. Keith Richards set the glasses on the stool beside him. Keith Richards closed his eyes. What came out of the Telecaster in the next 5 minutes was the thing that Keith Richards had been compressing into a deliberately mediocre container across 2 rounds of competition, and the decompression was total. The opening riff of Brown Sugar arrived in the boardwalk the way music arrives when the person playing it has been holding it back and has finally been given the signal to stop. Not loudly, not as a demonstration, but with the completely natural, inevitable quality of a river that has been briefly dammed and has found its own level. The room did not go quiet, the room changed. 300 people stopped being an audience and became something else, something that had no name but that musicians spend their whole careers trying to produce. The condition of a room that has given itself over entirely to a sound and is no longer aware of anything else. Dave Meller, at the judges' table, had his pen positioned above the scorecard on which he had already written Jack Turner, final round. The pen was still. The scorecard remained blank. Dave's mouth was open. A man in the fourth row stood up and said, loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "That's Keith Richards. That's Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones." The recognition moved through the boardwalk in the specific way it moved through a room where 300 people had been listening to something and suddenly understood what they had been listening to and who had been making it. Ronnie Wood, who had come back in time for the final, was standing on his chair at the back table. Keith Richards finished. 300 people produced an ovation that made the walls of the boardwalk vibrate and that lasted long enough for Keith Richards to stand up, place the Telecaster carefully on the stool, and walk to the microphone. Keith Richards looked at Dave. "Dave's absolutely right," Keith Richards said. "I do need more practice. I've been at it about 47 years, so maybe a few more will do the trick." The laughter that came from 300 people in a Sheffield basement on a November Saturday night was the kind of laughter that a room produces when it has been offered the perfect release after the perfect tension. Total, physical, collective, the laughter that connects people who have just shared something they will still be talking about in 20 years. Dave Mellor, at the judges' table, was laughing too. His professional dignity surrendered entirely to a situation so completely, beautifully ridiculous that there was nothing to do but yield to it. Then Keith Richards did what Carlos Santana had done at Gruene Hall 5 years later, and what genuine musicians have always done when they are given a stage that is not really theirs to keep. Keith Richards said he was not eligible. He had entered under a false name and was clearly not an amateur. Keith Richards said he wanted to say something about someone who was eligible. Keith Richards pointed at Emma Hartley, who was standing at the side of the stage with tears on her face. "That young woman played one of the finest guitar performances I have heard from a musician of any age," Keith Richards said, "in this room or anywhere else. She played with truth. She is the winner tonight. And if she will allow me, I would like to play one more song with her before I return this stage to the people it belongs to." Emma Hartley walked onto the stage on legs she later described as no longer entirely reliable. Keith Richards handed her the Telecaster, took up a second guitar that Liam Bradley offered from the side of the stage, and the two of them played for 20 minutes while 300 people in Sheffield stood still and listened to a 19-year-old girl and the man who wrote Satisfaction make the music that the room had been waiting all night to hear, without knowing it. Keith Richards played rhythm and support. Emma played lead, finding phrases and melodic ideas that she had not attempted before, reaching for notes she had not known were available to her, discovering in the presence of someone who knew exactly how far the ceiling was, that the ceiling was considerably further than she had believed. Before leaving, Keith Richards shook Dave Mellor's hand. "No hard feelings, Dave. You were doing your job, and your instinct was right about one thing. I was holding back. You said I had potential. You were right. I just have a little more of it than you estimated." Dave said, "I told Keith Richards he needed proper tuition. I will never live this down." Keith Richards said, "Don't live it down. Put it on a plaque." Emma Hartley won the Yorkshire Blues competition trophy that night and used the victory and the story of the duet to secure a music scholarship the following spring that launched a career she has been building in the 20 years since. On the wall of the boardwalk in Sheffield, in a wooden frame between a photograph of the venue's 1987 opening night and a poster from a 2001 blues festival, hangs the original competition sign-up sheet from the first Saturday of November 2003. Entry 7 reads, "Jack Turner, age 57, retired plumber, Leeds." In Dave Mellor's handwriting beside it, phrasing predictable, scraped through, "Has potential, needs proper tuition." Beneath the frame, a brass plaque reads, "The night Jack Turner entered our Yorkshire Blues competition." Dave told him he needed proper tuition. His name was Keith Richards. November 2003. We have not recovered. If this story gave you something, the reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is usually the one you've already decided isn't the most dangerous person in the room, share it today with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Every week, another story from a life that always knew the best way to prove what you can do is to spend 2 rounds proving you are not going to, and then do it anyway.